for sure, one of the issues that has emerged in all of this is the capability of schools to take the necessary steps to ensure that the kind of procedures and strategies are in place to minimize the chances of students contracting the virus and its spread. Those things are related to a number of features in any kind of facility that actually houses people. And what we know about school facilities in the United States in general is that by and large, for the most part, many of them are very old and in bad need of repair. That's just the nature of the way that education has unfolded in the country over the past 50, 75 to 100 years. Then what comes along with the aging of facilities, as you might expect, is that you end up with problems with HVAC systems, air circulation, ventilation, heating, air conditioning. All of those become real critical issues when we look at aging buildings. And we know that what the research is telling us about this particular virus, that it is spread through the transmission of, through its transmission in the atmosphere, in the air environment that surrounds people. So the question then of how to manage this in a school system, especially in classrooms in a school, where you have students in a confined space for most of the day, where you may have a building that's in bad need of repairs. The question of how do you manage this without increasing the risk that's concomitant with students being in a population-dense situation is really the question at hand. So I think you see that there have been instances where schools have reopened. We've had the spread of the virus in those situations. There have been some cases that have achieved a great deal of notoriety in the press and in the national media where students were seen crowded in hallways. So my advice is that districts and district officials are going to have to be very intentional from the very beginning of this and have clearly articulated plans that incorporate on a daily basis not just the data of the incidents and spread and identification of the disease within schools, but also data that lets them understand how well their teachers and their students are able to comply with the regulations that would argue for the best outcomes as far as their safety is concerned. So for us at this point to say yes, but it's best for those children to be back in schools for their own safety, begs the question of what it is. Why aren't we ensuring that those communities can be safe places as far as the resources and the services needed to limit and eliminate the spread of the disease in their communities? That's an important question. Another question is that we have to ask ourselves this. We understand that much of us going back, if you will, to whatever the new normal is tied into where the national economy is. People talk about it all the time. And I know it's easy for us to decide, well, this is really not about the national economy. But when you keep hearing it brought up over and over again, and you realize that it is the parents of these children, these low-income Black and these low-income Latino children, who in fact actually make the wheels of the economy turn on the ground, then it would beg the question of whether or not we're making a decision that is not in the best interest of these children, especially when you couple with the other questions that I asked. Resource allocations, and how is it that we cannot ensure that children are safe in their communities? And once you put those particular points together in a sequence of logic, it actually takes you back historically, back to Brown versus Board of Education, when there was another time in our nation's history where children were moved into environments that were hostile for a different reason. It's because the nation was struggling with its moral compass at that point, and whether or not Blacks and whites were going to be able to be educated together and live together in harmony in integrated communities. And here we are again, more than 60 years later, students from these same communities, students, low-income students of color, Black students, Latino students, are now having to go back into these buildings in bad need of repair. And this time, their health is being placed at risk, and we know that. So as we do that, we then have to ask ourselves another question. When we talk about students going back in the same breath as we talk about the national economy, are we in fact talking about what's in the best interest of the students? Or are we really placing their interests at risk for the bigger question? And that is the kind of country that we're struggling with becoming at this point. The economy is one thing. Children's health is another. When you hear people talk about children are disappointed because they aren't there with their friends, when you hear people talk about, but we're taking all of the necessary precautions, when you hear people talk about acceptable loss in communities, when you hear these items being discussed, you have to back up a second and you say to yourself, it's one thing to talk to a child about the child being disappointed. It is another thing to have to work a child through a conversation about grief and the loss of loved ones. And I believe that is just what is at risk at this point.